It'd be quite a movie actor.
Good morning. Good to be with all of you for Bible study. Today we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 32, and we are leaping all the way from Exodus 12 and 13. So there's some mini stories, interesting and exciting stories, which might be familiar to you, that are in that interim. So I'm here with Ed Waters and Geraldine Lipke and Dorothy Magnuson, and kind of have the window open and distancing, so keeping my mask off, because otherwise my glasses fog up and I am even more debilitated. Anyway, so with Exodus 13, where we left off, you might recall there was this question about the leaven and why all the focus on leavened and unleavened. So I did do a little bit of homework on that. And it's like a lot of things in the Bible. There's maybe more here than you want to know. But most often it says the rationale for this prohibition, because, we heard, get it all out of your house, was that fermentation was emblematic of a process of corruption. The leaven was capable of debasing and corrupting the mass of dough. So, if you're thinking of it in the metaphorical sense, get anything out of your house that might lead to corruption. We want to prohibit that for sure for these 7 days. So then in the New Testament, leaven is used for the unsound teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. If you look in Matthew chapter 16. Also for the moral laxity of the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 5. And it says here, the association of these ideas was also known in other traditions. Among the Greeks and the Romans, they both made the connection of leaven with a reference to moral corruption. Now, again, where it gets interesting or curious, leaven is used in a good sense in the parable of the leaven. Jesus likens this silent, unrelenting growth of the kingdom of God among people. So it's like a lot of things, there's a little more to it. Makes you scratch your head and say, well, why would Jesus do that if people generally associated leaven or this with moral corruption? Anyway, that's where I was like, usually you dig in a little bit and then you find yourself scratching your head just about as much as before you dug in. Anyway, so I don't know if you have any further questions about that. I probably wouldn't be able to answer them anyhow. We could look in the New Testament and find those references and so on and so forth.
Well, can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
When we make the bread for communion here, is it unleavened? Or did they put a little yeast in it or whatever?
No, I don't know. I've got the recipe and it doesn't have yeast in it.
Okay.
I don't remember.
So it's kind of like
kind of flat, yeah.
Kind of flat, like the Jewish recipe. Yeah.
Like a biscuit maybe or something.
Yeah,
that
okay.
doesn't
Yeah, I mean, it's not super thin, of course, like a matzah cracker or something like that, But yeah, it's definitely not like a whole loaf of bread like you might buy typically in the store. Anyway, so where we left off, chapter 13 goes on to talk about the pillars of cloud and fire, how God led them by a pillar of fire, or cloud by day and fire by night. And that was, in front of the people so that they could journey on and really get, far from Egypt quickly. Well, then, as you might recall, 14 is a continuation of the story, and it's told now in prose. So it's like there's this story that is now being recorded, as opposed to an event here, an event there, which is kind of how 12 and 13 seemed a little bit like we were there in the moment, and it can seem kind of confusing and what's going on. We talked about that, like we're really meant to be there and participate in this. But then chapters 13, 14, and following kind of zoom out, you might say, and give this more story or narrative telling. And in 14, you get the crossing of the Red Sea, chapter 14, and, Moses with the rod, and it tells the people in verse 13 of chapter 14, "But Moses said to the people, 'Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still.'" So again, that emphasis on this is a God thing that you're about to experience. Okay, and what happens? Of course, the pursuers of the Egyptian army is drowned in the sea. And in 15, we have a song of Moses, and in the latter part of the chapter, it's the song of Miriam, the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister. She's introduced for the first time in that section, and she takes a tambourine, and with dancing, she sings to the Lord, "For he has triumphed gloriously, horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." All right, and then no sooner have they gotten out of their huge dilemma and been rescued and delivered. And 16 and 17, do you remember what happens as soon as they get out in the wilderness? Why have you done this? You brought us out here to die. There's no food. What are we going to do? Woe is us. Right? And so how does God provide?
Pardon?
How does God provide when they
the
complain?
manna and the quail.
The meat and the bread, or manna is a strange substance. We think of it as sort of a bread-like substance, but no one is quite sure. And then, okay, so yay, that's wonderful. And then next chapter, more complaining. Well, we're dying of thirst. What is going on? Hello, Roger. Thanks for coming. So again, more complaining, and then there's also an interesting part in that chapter of Amalek attacks Israel and is defeated. So there's an early battle, but it is it's again a victory that God does through Moses, Aaron, and Hur, H-U-R. So a lot of interesting stories here that maybe we haven't looked at in quite a while. But then in chapter 18, I was looking this morning, it's really interesting. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, comes for a visit. And he instructs Moses about how to be better at administering justice and being judge. So it's like the community is large, and all of a sudden they're like, we are free, but what do we do with this freedom? Well, we complain, and we get in fights, and we have disputes, and all the things that make up a nation. Moses has to judge the people. And Jethro says, you're going to wear yourself out. You'll never survive if you're doing that all by yourself. So appoint other people who are trustworthy. Let them sit as judges for the people. Let them bring only the most important cases to you, but they can decide every minor case themselves. So that's, again, a story I was like, I don't really recall that too well. At 19, then, the Israelites reach Mount Sinai. Okay? And in verse 4, it's a critical verse, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Do you remember that verse, or does that 19 verse 4? God is always trying to remind them about what I did for you. And in this case, uses that beautiful language of how I bore you on eagle's wings, meaning I will bear you up, not I will bore you to tears, kind of boredom. It's like, if you're not looking at it, be like, what? I'm going to bore you? Kids nowadays are like, I'm bored. This is a different verb. Okay? So then Moses came, summoned the elders of the people, set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. And the people answered as one, everything that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So they're committing themselves to obedience and righteousness. Hello, Don. Good to see you. Julie, hello.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Get my hair done? No, he's got to go get his hair done.
All right. You'll all be looking good.
Yeah.
Not that you weren't, but anyway. So then God or Moses goes up the mountain, and it says in I'm still in chapter 19, verse 23. Moses said to the Lord, "The people are not permitted to come up to Mount Sinai, and you are to go down." God says to Moses, "You go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you." And so Moses went down to the people and told them. And then God spoke all these words. So right now with the confirmation kids, I'm teaching them the 10 Commandments. And I really, kind of keep trying to remind them. So where would you find that in the Bible? Exodus 20. There is another time that it's also there listed. But this is the main time that we look at. And so we call them the 10 Commandments, but I believe in Jewish tradition they call them the 10 words, the 10 teachings. Commandments is a strong word, obviously, but anyway, it starts out with God saying, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." So God credentials God's self before giving the word or the command. And the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." Right? And then the next one, "You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I am the Lord your God." So it's really interesting. The chapter, of course, goes on with some commandments having further explanation, some being very straightforward. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. But then it goes on from there. 21 and 22 are further laws. Again, people who are now their own nation need some laws. They need something they know that they're going to do to have community work for one another, and how So how do they relate to one another? How do they relate to God? And those are in 21 and 22. 23 says, justice for all is the heading on my beginning of that chapter. And then there's an interesting part in this chapter. The conquest of Canaan is promised. So they're not there yet. You know, the promised land is still a ways off. They're still in the wilderness. It's a long ways both physically, the journey will be long, and then also in terms of time, we know that they have many years before they will reach. But there's this promise of a divine warrior. I am going to send an angel in front of you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. 24, the covenant is ratified. And once again, the people, in 24 verse 7, then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. Period. So some of this, of course, is significant for when we get to chapter 32, right? Because it doesn't quite go as they had promised. So the covenant is ratified there, and in verse 12, chapter 24, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. Okay. And then the next, there's a whole section here, and I didn't read all this, but Moses learns how to set up the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. So that's 25 and 26 and 27 and 28 and 29 and 30 and 31. So it really goes on for a bit with a lot of detail. And so we're not going to read all that. I want us to leap now to 32. Okay, so that's kind of lots of different things that have transpired since the Passover. And so let's start at 32. What is the line or the heading at the top of your Bible for this chapter? 32?
The golden calf.
Golden calf.
Okay, anybody have anything else? Ed, do you have a different heading?
I got that, and then it says the holy anointing of
Where are
oil.
we at now?
32. Exodus chapter 32. 32.
Okay, which verse?
No,
Just the start of
Just
the
start.
chapter. Is there a heading or anything
Okay.
in
When
yours?
Moses didn't come back down the mountain right away, the people went to Aaron. Look, they said, make us a god to lead us, for this fellow Moses, who brought us here from Egypt, has disappeared. Something must have happened to him.
Okay, pause. That's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Given everything I just talked about or covered. So what are you noticing? What's going on? What catches your eye or strikes you as odd?
Well, the boss is away, cat wants to play, kinda, I mean, that's layman terms, but
Yeah.
as soon as Moses is gone, they already start thinking about how they can do it their way.
Okay. Yep. What else? Roger's translation said, make a god for us. Mine, they translate and say, make gods for us, lowercase g. Who shall go before us? Which is, again, very interesting. Remember the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night? And now, as soon as Moses is gone, we don't know what to do. We don't know where we're going. We need a God or gods for us who will lead us, who shall go before us. So I thought that was pretty curious or interesting. And what does it say about Moses? A couple things at the second half of the verse.
He must have disappeared.
Yeah, we don't know what has become of him. We're impatient, and it's been a long time. Okay? But also, my translation says, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Okay, he was your leader, but was he really the one who was, we might say at the helm? Or was it, again, like I said, this was God's action? So I find that phrasing curious, that they say the man who did this, as opposed to thinking, oh, God did this. This man Moses did this. It's curious, given again what has transpired.
What I found, maybe I'm being too technical, but what I found a little hard to understand, right away, that's jumping ahead here, but the thing is, give me your golden earrings, Aaron replied.
Yeah, go ahead.
These people-
Well, let's go into verse 2. Read it, please.
Give me your golden earrings, Aaron replied. So they all did, men and women, boys and girls. Aaron melted the gold and then molded and tooled it into a form of a calf. The people exclaimed, "O Israel, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt."
Okay, pause again.
What I was going to add to that, or start out with, is these people were slaves, and they all got gold earrings, huh?
Well, didn't they get them from the Egyptians when they left? Didn't they give them gold or jewelry and stuff?
Did they?
Yeah, I thought I read that someplace.
Yeah, there is this. Again, the details are confusing, but it almost sounds like there was some plunder, or maybe it was like, here, just take this and go, or what. I don't want to go back and go into those details,
I
but
didn't mean to get too deep, but
no.
It just stood out to me. A bunch of slaves out in the middle of the desert, and they all got gold earrings.
Yeah, there is. There's a note here in my Bible about that. It says, the rings, take off the gold rings, goes back to something from Genesis chapter 35, with foreign gods that must be suppressed at Bethel, one of Jeroboam's cult sites. So, and I think it was another thing I read where the gold rings may have been a way of marking them as slaves.
Oh,
But it seems like, well, why would you use gold? That seems a little much. But it was something to that effect. But again, I just find it interesting how quickly this their impatience leads to such rash action, and they seem very eager to participate. Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. Okay, so they're not, I was showing something on my wrist, but it's from their ears. And here now, verse 4, he took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, or the Hebrew could be fashioned it with some kind of a tool, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, Dorothy, how does yours word that, what they said in verse 4?
They took it, they handed it, and made it into an ideal cast in the shape of a calf, fashioned it with a tool.
Okay, and they said?
And then they said, these are your gods, O Israel.
So,
Who brought you out of Egypt.
yeah. So again, where is that coming from? You know, it's just like, it's just a head scratcher. It's like, what are you even talking about, people? You know, I mean, you would think they should know it was God, Yahweh, not a golden calf, and not a series of gods. You know, it just, it kind of is, it's pretty astounding.
Can I bring something back here about the jewelry? It says in Exodus 4, every woman is to, and I will make the Egyptians favorable disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing. So you will plunder the Egyptians.
Okay, so
That's where they
that's,
got their silver.
that's
Is that
it.
in that, is that in your regular Bible, or is that little
Yeah, no,
history?
that's in the Bible.
That's not in
Which
that
chapter
Bible.
it was, I think it was.
Did you say chapter
Because that
4?
other book
Okay.
you got, you know, you're cheating all the time when you come up with them.
Yeah, I forgot to look in that when I was.
Oh, no, it's the very end of chapter 3.
Oh, is that where?
Yeah, that's good though. Each woman shall ask her neighbor and any woman living in the neighbor's house for jewelry of silver and gold and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Here, the note in my Bible says the plunder is literally the stripping away divine compensation for Egypt's exploitation of the Hebrews. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, well, you've done all this to us, and now we're at least going to have something in return. But then what do they do with that? They throw it together to create a false god.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I was reading, one thing, some scholars say, well, were they making a false god like Baal, which was shaped like a calf, and there was Baal worship, and it was like the god of fertility and all that? Or was it that they were trying to make an image of God who rescued them, because here are your gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So it may be that there's a breaking of the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, and or there's a breaking of the second commandment, which is don't make idols, don't make, something that you will then bow down and worship, because God is above and beyond all that. You can't just contain God in some idol type thing. I mean, God is not something that we can create in our image. Mm-hmm. So the fact that Aaron chooses to make it into the shape of a calf, again, is mysterious, and it's thought, well, maybe he just did that because that's a shape or a form that the people would have been familiar with. But again, it's like, huh? Well, let's go on, because it is a very odd text. Geraldine, do you want to pick up at verse 5, please? Maybe 5 and 6?
When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry.
Revelry. Yeah, that's a hard word to say. Mine says, and rose up to revel. So, again, this is partly why there's that question that I just mentioned, because Aaron built an altar and he says, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. And it's in all caps, which means Yahweh. It's not we're going to get up and worship Baal. So again, it's that's why it's like maybe this is more a breaking of the second commandment, but in any case, I don't think this is at all what pleases the Lord, as we will find out. Because they rose up to revel, which, makes it sound like rebel. I mean, there's almost a play on words there in English.
Sexual immorality.
Immorality?
Immorality.
Oh.
That's what it says in this one.
Yeah, and I don't know, again, maybe that's the editor of your particular Bible or whatever, or maybe it is like that is the connotation in the Hebrew. But 1105?
Well, is that when
Is that a test?
they check the, they check?
Must be.
I think they just check at that.
Yeah.
11 o'clock is usually.
Yeah. it's usually 11 o'clock, yeah.
Okay. They're just off by a few minutes.
Yeah.
Or
First
something.
bomb goes off, they'll talk.
All right, so they seemed all too eager, number one, to give away their gold, to make this happen. Aaron seemed all too willing to try to be a people pleaser. And then maybe he, in verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it and made proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. So maybe he realized, okay, this is going horribly awry. Can I steer it back at all to something that is actually profitable or pleasing to God? I mean, I don't know. Aaron seems to sort of fall down on the job here. It's like Moses is gone. As Ed said, cat's away, the mice will play, and Aaron just kind of is like, I guess I'll go along with it because I don't want to be the bad cop or something. It's like, but I think the people needed you to lay down the law and say, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to be pleasing to God. All right, so anyway, now we shift to a whole nother scene. We are suddenly on the mountain. Okay, so Moses has been gone at the start of the chapter, and nobody knows for how long, and suddenly we're up there though, and we get this conversation. Okay. Dorothy, let's go back to you. Do you want to read at 7?
7. Then the Lord said to Moses, go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed it, and have said, These are our gods, O Israel, who brought us up out of Egypt.
Okay, thanks. So just 2 verses. We get a summary from God's perspective of what's going on. And what do you notice or what do you wonder about God's reaction or God's response?
Well, it's gotta hurt.
Yeah?
I mean, he's gotta be hurt.
Yeah.
All the stuff he's done for him, even in their traveling across, the Red Sea and all that kind of stuff, and the pillar of light, and he did all that for him, and now they quickly discarded him.
Mm-hmm. They've been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. And what else do you notice or wonder? Whose people are they in this scene? Whose people are they?
Israel's?
No, the Israelite people, but who does God say they belong to?
Your people.
Your people. This is I disown them. This is not my people. I thought they were. Now they're behaving like this. I'm writing them off. It's kind of like, it's really dramatic, right? It's kind of...
Your people that you brought from Egypt.
Yeah, you did this, and they're your people, and look at what they're doing. I mentioned this to the kids last week, or maybe it was the week before, I don't know. Anyway, about how parents will sometimes say that with their kids. Mom's been home with the kids, let's say, and dad comes in the door and she'll say, like, you won't believe what your kids have done today, or vice versa. It could be, like, your son has been incredibly bad behavior or whatever. And it's like, kid probably is like, obviously they're sort of kidding, but they're also like deadly serious. Like, this is not what I expect my child to do or behave like. It's almost funny if it wasn't so tragic. Like Ed is saying, that's God is saying, what in the world? They're acting perversely, and doing exactly the kind of thing I commanded them not to do. And giving credit to some other god or gods, saying they are the ones who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, after all these times that God has said, remember who did this. I'm the Lord. I did this. And you're the beneficiary. And, okay.
Why would they have made it in the shape of a calf? Does that have any something?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit. I think the Canaanite god or gods, the Baal, would be shaped like a bull.
Oh, that's right.
And so this might be a shape or a thing that they associated with gods.
Okay.
Now, it may also go back to, who knows if that was also the case, maybe with an Egyptian god. And I'm trying to remember if I read that as well. So of course Egyptians had lots of different gods, and probably in shapes of all kinds of things. If you well, anyway, so I'm sure many of you remember watching the Ten Commandments, that epic. Who's the main star? Yul Brynner, who played Moses?
Mm-hmm.
for all,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, I remember even watching that growing up, what was it, on Sunday of Holy Week? Or what day? It was shown on the same, like sometime during Holy Week for years, you know. And I think now I watched some of those scenes, and I thought, oh, I couldn't possibly show this to kids today, because it's kind of, I mean, I think they would just laugh at it because it is so rudimentary compared to what movie making is today, right? But these kinds of scenes, I think we maybe picture that because of how we saw it on film for, you know, years. And this whole idea of the reveling and the calf and the worship. And all right, so picking up at 9, let's go back to Roger. Do you want to say 9 and 10? What does God say?
Then the Lord said, I have seen what a stubborn, rebellious lot these people are. Now let me alone, and my anger shall blaze out against them and destroy them all. And I will make you, Moses, into a great nation instead of them.
Whoa. It's like, boom. I mean, there's a statement. What do you make of that?
He's mad.
He's
hurt.
He's mad. He's hurt, and he wants Moses to leave me alone. I think that's really interesting. So that my wrath may burn hot against them. But of you I will make a great nation. Meaning, we'll start over.
Yeah. Struck up.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, when has this idea happened before? In Genesis.
Oh, is the flood?
Yeah. Noah and his family.
Yeah.
We're going to wipe everybody out, but I will keep you and your family, and we'll save the animals and all that in the ark. But yeah, everyone else is going to be wiped out. My wrath is going to burn hot against them. And then there's this language of, I will make you a great nation. Well, who was it that first received that promise? In Genesis 12 and 15 that we looked at recently. Or maybe we did that one before we gathered. But Abraham, right? You will become the father of a great nation. You will have as many descendants as there are stars, more than you can count, right? And so it's like, wait, what happens if God were to do that? What happens to that covenant? The covenant that, was made and God was faithful to. I mean, even in their old age, Sarah was still able to have a child, and Isaac was the child born. And so, going back to Exodus, when God revealed God's self to Moses and said, what is your name? And it's like, I am who I am was one of the names that God revealed. And the other one was, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And now it's like God's going to say, they're so bad, I'm going to kick them all to the curb and consume them. And we're just going to start over. Okay, so now comes the
Wheeling and dealing.
the critical, if you're Moses, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
And Moses has to like think quickly and think on his feet. And God has just said, now let me alone. And does Moses do so? Ed, read a couple verses here, please.
But Moses begged God not to do it. Lord, he pleaded, why is your anger so hot against your own people, whom you brought from the land of Egypt, with such great power and mighty miracles? Do you want the Egyptians to say, God tricked them into coming into the mountains so that he could slay them, destroying them from off the face of the earth? Turn back from your fierce wrath. Turn away from this terrible evil you are planning against your people. Remember
Okay.
that
Pause there. Whew. So,
I think, you know what I think great about that piece there, I read that before. Moses stood right up to the Lord. You know what I'm saying? You're not just talking to an ordinary guy on the corner.
yeah,
I mean, that took some,
chutzpah. Isn't that a Yiddish word? I think so. Yeah, no kidding. And now, whose people are they?
they're your people.
Your people, God. Don't forget.
Don't be putting them on.
Yeah, no, this is not my rabble. This is your people. You created them. You brought them out of the land of Egypt. Remember, you did it with great power and with a mighty hand. So, what is one of the things that's at stake for God if God followed through on God's wrath? Verse 12.
Oh, the Egyptians.
Yeah, they're gonna. I mean, the whole thing would be like, what kind of crazy God did they have? God rescues them from our grasp, brings them out powerfully, mightily, only to wipe them out. I mean, it's like Moses appeals to God's own reputation. Right? I mean, that's pretty curious, but so there's a note here in my Bible that at the end of verse 12, turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind. It says, where was that? Change your mind. In Hebrew, this was a pun on the phrase earlier, let me alone. Okay? So God says, let me alone, and Moses says, change your mind. You can't do this. You can't, I'm not going to leave you alone. Because sometimes, I mean, again, think about when we're alone and not in community with other people, does it bring out the best in you or maybe sometimes the worst in you?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, sometimes I feel like we need the community, we need the church, we need people to help us. We sometimes talk about appeal to our better angels, right? But if I'm isolated and I'm on my own, I mean, that's, I think, what we hear happens with some of these kids who are being bullied, let's say like online or whatever, and they feel isolated, they feel alone, they feel like nobody cares. And they end up doing some pretty horrible things. But if they talk to somebody else, or if they, do some kind of a chat, or they do some kind of a tip-off of, it's like sometimes people say, that's kind of a cry for help. You better pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Because they're feeling so hurt, so angry, they're about to do something terrible. And boy, here Moses steps into the into the fray and says, change your mind. And this, of course, brings up the whole question about prayer and what is the purpose of prayer? Interceding on another's behalf. Do we have some kind of a power there? Or is God just going to always do what God will do? It's a question, I think. A lot of people will say, well, prayer changes us more than it'll change God. God already has plans beyond our knowing or understanding. But in this case, it certainly seems like Moses had some power there. So I'll go on and finish because we're getting close to the end of our time. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants. Israel, of course, being another name for Jacob. How you swore to them by your own self. So there is the appeal to God's reputation as how is this going to look in the media? What are the optics of this? Not good. You better step back from that cliff or whatever. And maybe more important than that, of course, is your servants. You swore to them by your own self. Okay? Saying to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So God, your whole covenant, your end of that bargain is on the line here too. Are you willing to just throw that away? Because you're hot under the collar and mad as a hatter or what? It's like verse 14. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. Whew.
Yeah.
Here it says, verse 15, which is not part of our reading, but it says, then Moses turned. Moses did, and I guess in the Hebrew it's like, Moses did an about face and went down from the mountain. Maybe after that encounter he was running. Like, I said my piece, now I got to get out of here. The ball's back in your court, God. But it does sound like the Lord changed his mind, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, written in the front and on the back. Tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved upon the tablets. So the chapter goes on from here, and there's other, difficult details and whatever, but I think the main part here is that, well, let me ask you, what would be kind of a key takeaway from this? What do you think the whole point of this story might be? What would you say? If
God will forgive anything.
God will forgive anything. Very good, yeah.
After what all,
All loving and all forgiving.
no,
I used that
at
one.
a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, well, what they did was unforgivable. And then Moses says, are you sure about that? You better be true to yourself and don't do something you're going to regret.
This has nothing to do with the story, but I don't ever remember reading that Moses threw down the tablets and they broke. look at the foot, I didn't realize that happened.
You know where I remember that? I remember that from the movie.
Yeah, well, from the movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not gonna disagree with Pastor,
But I mean,
but I thought they did a nice job on the movie. But then I didn't know nothing then.
Yeah, you didn't know a lot.
And now
Well-
when you get into the Bible, you find, you know. you
No,
find-
I think in terms of the story and in terms of some of the theology and adherence to the story, it's well done. I just meant like for young people today, because the cinematography was so basic or rudimentary,
yeah.
and now we have CGI and all these special effects and all this ways of showing
Oh,
things
okay.
in so much more dramatic ways that I think kids would go, this is so weird. I can't even take in the message or the
Yeah,
what is intended, because I think it would be distracting to them because it's an old movie.
yeah.
I mean, I try to watch some old classics. Sometimes I got them on Netflix and I was just like, I don't know. I really want to watch this whole thing, but it's kind of boring. I'm not saying that about the Ten Commandments, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there's many more details and challenging things as you go through the rest of the chapter. But our focus is on those first 14 verses, and yeah, thankfully God does change God's mind. And I guess we'll end with a prayer and be on our way. Oh God, we give you thanks for, again, this amazing book, the book of Exodus, found in the Bible. We often struggle over your word and what it might mean, but in the big picture, we understand you as a loving God and able to forgive. Forgive even the things that may seem unforgivable. And that is good news for us. We thank you for your Son Jesus, who took away our sin so that we might have new life. And we pray that you would continue to watch over us, keep us safe, keep us healthy, keep us witnessing to your love in our words and in our actions. In Jesus' name, amen.